Living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Hello, friends. This is Relationship Prescriptions, and I'm Dr. Carol. Thanks so much for joining us. I am a stepmom. When I married my husband, he had 2 grown sons. They have wives. Each of them have 2 children. I don't call them stepfamily. They are my sons and daughters-in-law and my grandchildren. I have had a very positive step-parenting experience, but for many stepmoms, that is not the case. Stepfamilies have actually now become the norm. Some statistics say that there are more children being raised with at least one step-parent than are living with both biological parents. And certainly when you take into account children who are grown, blended families are more common than what might have been called the intact nuclear family of the past. And the body of Christ needs to minister to these people, like me, like others, like perhaps you, if you are part of a blended family. Well, Laura Petherbridge does exactly that. And she is my guest today on the episode. Laura Petherbridge serves couples and single adults around topics of spiritual growth, relationships, stepfamilies, co-parenting, divorce prevention and recovery. She's an internationally known speaker and author of a number of books, including The Smart Stepmom. She's appeared on numerous television and radio broadcasts. She's featured in the Divorce Care video series, viewed in thousands of churches around the world. I know that this conversation will bless you if you are connected in any way with a blended family, and especially for stepmoms. You'll notice near the end of this conversation, Laura's mic cuts out a couple times, but I believe you'll be able to get the message very clearly. And it's an encouraging message. So here's my conversation with Laura Petherbridge. Well, Laura Petherbridge, I am so grateful that you have taken this time to share your experience and wisdom. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Now, this topic of stepmoms and blended families is a big one in the body of Christ, in our culture. For people who may not know you, can you maybe just give us a little idea of how you came to this, maybe your own family experience and how this has been a real personal thing in your life?
Yes. Well, I grew up in a step family. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old, so I've had 2 stepmoms. My dad remarried 2 more times after the divorce from my mother. So I had 2 stepmoms and 1 stepdad. And so I know what step-family living is from a child perspective, growing up, teenager, adult, and then went through a divorce myself when I was almost 30, and then married a man that had 2 children. They were 11 and 13 at that time. That was 33 years ago. Mm. And so I just felt that because I grew up in a step family that I knew everything there was to know about being a stepmom. Yes.
I take it that wasn't the case.
Right.
So if you could look back and talk from a child's perspective, just for a moment or two, we'll talk about from the stepmom's perspective in a moment, but as a child, what might have been some things you wish that your step-parents might or should have known that would have made things easier for you?
Yes. Well, I think in particular my stepmom, not so much my stepdad, because my mom and he dated for a long time before they actually were together. But I was only, I think, 12 when my dad got remarried. And it felt like I lost my father. Mm. He had 2 children from a previous marriage, and they were with her full time, so they did not see their dad. And my father adopted them, so they had my dad 24/7.
Yes.
So we visited every other weekend, Friday to Sunday, which was the tradition back then. And it felt like her children got my dad 24/7. And then I even had to sacrifice him on the only weekends I was there. We had to do things completely all together, everybody all together. I never got my father just to myself.
So your stepmom messed up your life from your perspective as a little girl. She took away something that was important and you could never get it back.
Right. And it wasn't that I hated her or thought she was a bad person or anything. It just felt like, it just felt very unfair. I just felt like I didn't have my dad anymore once he remarried. And I don't think, anybody was trying to do that intentionally, but it was very much once he got married, okay, now we have to be the Brady Bunch and do everything together. And if I could speak to them as an adult now, that's one of the things I would say is, and I do say that to stepmoms, please let your husband have time alone with his kids.
Well, that goes directly into the big thing that we want to speak to, and that is the experience of being a stepmom. I'm a stepmom. Now, I had a really great experience there. My husband's two children were grown and out of the house when we married, and they welcomed me. My husband put me first in the family relationships, and it ended up being a very positive thing. And since he has passed away, his children and their families still include me as part of their life, and I consider them my grandchildren. But many stepmoms don't have nearly as pleasant that kind of experience. In your working with stepmoms, talk a bit about some of the things you hear that are not nearly as pleasant as my experience.
Well, I'm thrilled that that's been your experience, and it does happen. There are, in particular, adult children do embrace a stepmom, especially if they are mature and well-heeled themselves or have good families themselves. They're married or have kids or they're happy in their singleness. That gives them the opportunity to embrace a step-parent. But that means if they're adults, their brains have already developed. As a child, you don't have that. You have a lot of wounds that are still there for the child, and they, unlike an adult, they're not able to process all of that with a fully developed brain. So things that we would think as adults are irrational, or why does the child think like that, or I'm not trying to, ruin their life, the child can only see it through their pain. And what most people don't realize is that children are way behind adults in the grieving process. So,
I can imagine that would be the case as you're speaking about that, both whether they have lost a parent through death or divorce, whether this is whatever the reason for the blended family and having a step parent, they've lost something.
That's right. That's right. A death for them has occurred. Whether the parent died or their biological family died, divorce or separation, or, perhaps the parents were legally married. But regardless, see, for the adults, they're thinking, well, we weren't even married. Why would the child suffer? To the child, this is the loss of their biological family. And it is a grief. And it is an anger. It's all the things that come with grief. Step families are birthed on grief because either a death, divorce, or a breakup of the bio family had to have occurred in order for the step family to exist.
Wow. Yeah. For the stepmom to come into that environment, she did not give birth to these children, and that's just the reality. But what is she feeling? I've read some of your writings that stepmoms often feel like they're, second class or third place, or they're kind of left outside, and that's got to be uncomfortable.
Yes, it's uncomfortable, and they're hit with ambush of that because they did not expect that. They thought they were just like me, I'm going to come into the lives of these kids. I don't want to be their mother. They already have a mother. They don't need me to be a mom. That is one good thing I did learn from having step-family relationships as growing up. So I never tried to be their mother. Now, many stepmoms do, and that's a big mistake, but that's probably a whole show on its own. But
Yeah.
they're shocked at how outside the circle they feel, because when the kids come, they want their dad. So dad and the children are bonding, and often stepmom feels outside of that circle, and that's actually natural because she isn't a part of the bio family. This takes time. This takes a great deal of time before the children can view her as part of that circle.
What would you say to a stepmom that feels on the outside and she wants to try and do this right? Your book, The Smart Stepmom, she wants to be smart about doing this. Talk about some of the things that she can do to help that process of becoming a family happen.
Yes, well, one of the first things she should do, and actually this should happen before the marriage. Unfortunately, not many people do this kind of research before they get remarried or marry someone with children. But the first thing to do is to get some really good resources that explain what is normal in a step family. And when you read or see something that you don't like, that you don't agree with, that feels like, well, that's not going to happen to us, stop right there for a moment and reread that part, because that's normally revealing the weak link. It's normally revealing something that I'm resistant to. I don't want this to be true. I don't want that it's going to take time for these kids to bond with me. And see, sometimes kids do bond very quickly, especially if they're very young, but then they can fade away from that. Or after the wedding, they can turn on a dime, and all of a sudden the stepchild that just thought you were the greatest thing, now they realize, oh, she's now entered the picture as my dad's wife, and so I've been moved to the back seat. And so read resources, go to events that are designed specifically for step families, and in particular conducted by people that you really trust and know, and then get involved with some other step families, other stepmoms. That's why I host retreats for stepmoms, because they're often very isolated. And this way they can learn what's normal and how to handle those normal bumps in the road.
From a stepmom's perspective, one thing I hear you talking about is that as the stepmom, you cannot necessarily decide how your stepchildren are going to feel about you. You can be nice, you can be loving, you can be inviting, but the loss that they've experienced, you can't take that loss away. You cannot control how quickly or how permanently they stay bonded with you. You have to let go of some of that control.
Absolutely. I've said this from the very beginning, that the person who decides whether a step parent and a stepchild will have a relationship is the stepchild. You cannot force that child to embrace a step parent. Now, you can do things that would encourage and build a bridge, and you can do things that will destroy that, do things that make it very difficult for the child to embrace you. So you have control over that, of whether you become, extending an olive branch or a person who brings peace into the home or more chaos. But the child is the one that's really going to determine, will I open my arms, my heart, my mind, my life to embrace this person as a family member, or is it too painful for me, or I don't want that? And then that could fluctuate. They might love you at 5 years old and hate you at 15.
Mm-hmm. Even with me coming into a family where the children were grown, I remember it taking a number of years before everybody felt like family. Even with everybody having a great attitude, the familyness took time. Talk a bit about time. You alluded to that earlier, and that was sure the case for me, even in the best circumstance.
Yes, I'm so glad you shared that, because so many people think that it's wrong that it takes so long for it to happen. And most step family experts will agree that it takes approximately 7 years for a step family to feel like family. If it's going to happen, it's usually at about year 7, right around there, that they start to feel like this person is within the circle. And that goes the same way with step siblings, or even with, in-laws, like your parents, the stepmom's parents. Sometimes, every dynamic is different.
Sure.
It takes approximately 7 years for everybody to start feeling comfortable in the same home, in viewing that person as a family member, maybe introducing them as a family member. But it's not uncommon for that to take at least that long.
I'm glad you said 7 years too. I believe it was right around that point. I remember one of my stepdaughter-in-laws coming to me with a very personal, a difficult situation, and I was the one she felt safe with in asking for my help and my insight. And looking back, I am so grateful I gave them the time. I didn't try and intrude myself into their lives, but when they were ready, that invitation to help and to come closer, that meant so much to me, and I could welcome that because I gave them time.
Absolutely. See, that's the key, is you gave them time. And it's important to note that the daughter-in-law or stepdaughter-in-law, the in-law, can often feel closer to the stepmom or stepdad than the stepchild, like the daughter-in-law, because you see, that didn't wound her. That breakup of the family or death in the family did not wound her. You were just the nice stepmom when she came into the family that was either there or, presented herself later on in the marriage to her husband. So it's not uncommon for in-laws to embrace the step-parent much more quickly. Another person to note is grandchildren. Like I said, I've been married 33 years. I have 2 step-grandchildren, but they do not view me as a step-grandmother because I've been in their life since they were born. And so they call me Nana. To them, I am their Nana.
Right.
And so there was, because you see, I've been there since the beginning. There was no grafting me into the picture. I've just been there. So yes, there are perks.
I remember sitting around the Thanksgiving table shortly after my husband and I had been married, and there were his kids and their families and whatever. And they were talking about things that had happened long before I had been in the picture. And I remember having the choice at that moment. Do I feel left out? Do I feel like an outsider? Or can I be somebody here who is curious, who is interested, who can embrace this and enjoy it, even though they experience something I could never have been a part of? I remember that choice in my own heart at that time.
Yes, absolutely. And see, that goes to show your level of maturity, that you knew you had a choice at that moment. Now, I'm not saying that is easy. I am not saying, just suck it up, pretend like those years before you were there didn't happen. I am not saying. So many stepmoms, when they hear that, they think, well, I just hate it that my husband had a past with another woman and that she bore him children. And so I'm not saying those things don't hurt. I'm saying you have a choice to make. Am I going to let this be a thorn in my flesh and cause me to feel irritated? Now, if the kids are shoving you out, that makes it even harder to make that decision. But, as the stepmom, you do have to decide, am I comfortable enough in my own skin, in who I am, to say, you know what, my husband had a life before I came. And if I try to quench that or try to remove that from his life and the life of his children, they're just going to resent me. Now, I'm not saying you have to put the ex-spouse's or the former spouse's picture on the mantle over your fireplace. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that as long as you acknowledge that these kids and your husband has a relationship with the people that were there before you came along, it's going to be a lot smoother ride.
That does speak a bit to the marriage relationship. I'm aware of some statistics that indicate when one or both spouses bring children into the marriage, the chance of that marriage failing is markedly increased. Why do children from previous relationships make a marriage so much harder, at least statistically?
Yes, and it is true in my, I do a lot of life coaching for step-family couples when they come to an impasse, and a lot of therapists and pastors do not know how to address the step-family dynamic, or they try to address it the same you would a biological family, and that's very unwise because the dynamics are radically different. But in my life coaching clients, I would definitely say that the argument over children, how they're disciplining, how one disciplines one way, the other disciplines the other home. So you're parenting from two different homes, and you cannot control how the other home parents. And there's where the rub comes. And most of the time, the dad wants to keep peace between his ex-wife and his current wife and his children, and he feels caught in the middle all the time. He feels if he makes his wife happy, his ex-wife's going to be mad. If he makes his ex-wife happy, his wife is going to be mad. And so he's really in the corner just trying to figure out how to make peace. And sometimes he doesn't handle it well. Sometimes he's too soft and doesn't set any boundaries because he's afraid of losing his children. But the number one reason that second marriages do not succeed well is due to the children. The fighting over the parenting, who's doing what in what home, who's being a good parent, who isn't. It's all about the children. And so you do not have that in a first-time marriage.
Laura, you have talked about some big challenges in blended families. Maybe if we can take a moment and speak to someone who might be contemplating this marriage, either a single parent or a newly single parent, or maybe a woman who loves a man with children and they're contemplating getting married before stepping into a blended family. What are some things that would be really smart to think about or talk about?
Well, the number one thing is don't ignore the red flags. You see, most of us do see red flags when we're dating, in particular in a remarriage situation, but we ignore them. We think, oh, love will make this okay. Our family won't struggle like that. These kids are going to adjust really easily. So if you are seeing some issues already with ex-spouse, with the future stepchildren, the main thing is to get those things resolved and addressed in pre-marriage counseling, by going to step-family seminars. Don't ignore those issues and do not get married until you have a handle on how you are going to resolve. I've just lost track of the number of couples that I do life coaching with pre-marriage. And when I tell them this kind of thing, they think I'm being too negative or, well, we're in, that's not going to happen to us. And so my first thing would be, do not ignore the red flags, address them. The second thing is to make sure that you are connected with some sort of a support group or group, or start a support group of some sort that can give you the step-family support you're going to need, either through church or through your community, that type of thing. And number 3 is that when you obtain pre-marriage counseling or therapy or whatever your church or wherever you're getting married offers, make certain that you get that advice from someone who is a step-family expert. Many counselors or pastors will say they understand, but they really don't. And so if you start getting the counseling that you would get if you were a first-time marriage, then you need to find somebody else, because they need to work through the step-family dynamics in a different way than you would in a first-time marriage. So make certain that information is not the typical intimacy or communication skills, love and respect, 5 love languages. All of that stuff is great, but it is not what is going to prepare you for step-family life. You've got to address the issues that are unique to a step-family.
Wow, that is some good advice. And I'm grateful that I had enough maturity that my, stepmom experience has been positive. And I just want to say thank you for encouraging stepmoms that there are skills that they can learn. They are not the only one who may be experiencing a lot of these challenges. Laura, lastly, if you could maybe speak to someone who is a stepmom and things are not going well. They feel overwhelmed, they feel on the outside, they feel hurt. Just a little encouragement and maybe where they can go if they want to connect with you and get some of this kind of help.
That is a great question, and I love helping stepmoms. That is why I host stepmom retreats, so that they can get together and learn from each other. I have one coming up this fall in Nashville that will be exploring almost every type of stepmom. The other thing is to make sure that you are understanding you're not alone. This isn't unique to you. Most stepmoms do deal with some level of loneliness or anger or frustration or dealing with a former spouse that is complicated to work with. But you cannot control the other home. You have to learn how to take control of your own home. And if it is your spouse that is unwilling to set any boundaries with his children or his former spouse, let me share with you that may mean he was not ready. He didn't know what was going to be involved in getting remarried with kids. And I'm not throwing him under the bus. He just didn't know what he didn't know. And so he needs to become educated also. That's why in my book, The Smart Stepmom, I have 2 chapters right in the middle of that's to be used by the couple, so that typically the dads don't want to read a whole book, but they will work through those 2 chapters.
I think that's a guy thing for many of us.
Yes. And it just brings the necessary questions up to the surface. It can help him to understand what you need from him as the stepmom. And sometimes he's trying to put you in the position of being a mom to these kids when they don't want another mom. The ex-wife doesn't want them to have another mom, and you don't want to be the mom. But he's trying to push you into being the mom. And so it's very complicated, and it can't be solved with one easy, step. But there is hope. I've made it 33 years. I didn't kill anybody yet. Claim to fame.
Yes, exactly. Thank the Lord. Exactly.
And so you can learn ways to cope, to set boundaries. Sometimes it's a marriage problem and not a step-family problem, but it's hiding under a step-family problem. So yes, resources, life coaching, attending events, all of these things can help you to learn how to be a smart stepmom.
Wow. Thank you so much, Laura. I know that this speaks to so many people. How can people connect with you? Where would they go to find you if they want to connect?
Yes, I have a website, thesmartstepmom.com, thesmartstepmom.com. I also have a Facebook page that is totally dedicated to stepmom issues, stepmom questions, that kind of thing. And that is just The Smart Stepmom on Facebook. So you can find me at either of those places and send me an inquiry, and I'd be happy to point you to whatever I think is best for your situation.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure those links are also in the show notes. If you happen to be listening this while you're jogging or driving, come back, check the show notes, and connect with Laura. Well, I just have to give, again, a great big thank you for sharing your heart, your resources, and yourself with stepmoms and those related to blended families here on the podcast. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, if you are a stepmom or part of a blended family in any way, I know that Laura Petherbridge's insights have been encouraging. If you check the show notes for this episode, we will have links to Laura Petherbridge's site, thesmartstepmom.com, to her Facebook page. We'll also have a link there to her book, The Smart Stepmom, co-authored with Ron Deal. Blended families are now so common. Many researchers say that they are actually more common than children growing up with both biological parents. So arm yourself with information, connect with Laura and her resources if that is your situation, and I know that will bless you. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family, and until next time, may God bless you.